So in this session, we will talk about don't get lost in the jungle of guests on Office 365. I think it's an interesting session for all kind of roles, IT pro, developer, and end user, because it gives you an overview of guests in Microsoft 365, what means and how to implement strong governance to manage guests in the long term, especially when your organization works a lot with partners and vendor. Mark your calendars, because the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference will come next year, 23-25 March, and will be hosted in the Grand Resort Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. Before to start with my session, a big thank you to all our sponsors to make this virtual event possible. Stay ready for the raffle. You can win an Oculus Quest all-in-one. There is this link, so take your eyes on it. Thank you for joining us, and just for your info, the 10% of funds from sponsor go to support community relief, and please consider donating to the following charity relief funds: United Way or International Medical Corps. Okay, quick introduction about myself. Who am I? I am Giuliano De Luca. I am an Italian guy. I was born in Rome. Since last 5 years, I moved in Germany, and I'm living there now. I have been awarded by Microsoft with the Microsoft MVP for the category Office Development. I am an independent technical architect, blogger, speaker, and I started 2 weeks ago to be more proactive with my YouTube channel, and I want to publish video every week, two video. I will talk about Microsoft 365 and Azure more in general in this channel, and in my blog I post article quite technical. In the YouTube channel you can find videos more end user oriented and more in general for IT pro as well. Here you can find my Twitter handle. You can stay connected with me. I am glad to receive feedback or answer about Microsoft 365 and Azure. There's also my GitHub account. Here you can find for the moment 50 repositories there. I hope you can find a helpful solution there. I am also the author of MyLeoBot. It's a nice bot implemented with Office 365. You can install on your teams, and it helps you to create and automate the creation of tasks, list what kind of files are shared with you. You can ask who is your manager, and you can send email. And I'm trying to implement always more feature with this bot, and I think the good news it's totally free. You can explore, have a look, analyze, and I'm glad to receive feedback also around that. Okay, now let's kick off the agenda of this session. I will touch 4 points. First of all, I will give you an overview about guests in Microsoft 365, what is a guest. Then we will explore issues with guests, how to rule guests, how you can implement good governance on your tenant, and finally conclusions with useful resources. Okay, let's start with the first topic, guests in Microsoft 365. What is a guest in Microsoft 365? So basically, a guest is every user outside of your organization. Important configuration to perform in your Active Directory. The first one I would say is to configure the external collaboration settings on your tenant. This is something that a global admin can do, and there are, as you can see here, several options. You can limit the permission of a guest. You can allow members to invite guests, and you can allow guests as well to invite other guests. This configuration, it's very important to perform when you start to work on your tenant. Okay, now let's see a second important configuration to perform. It's in the SharePoint Admin Center. You have to write the right balance here according with your governance and how you want to kick off your tenant with guests. You can allow to share link with anyone, or you can apply more restriction. You can select, for example, for OneDrive and SharePoint different permission or the same permission, and you can collaborate with new and existing guests, or only with existing guests, or only you can restrict your tenant only for internal scope, so only to collaborate with colleagues. Okay, after that you performed these first configurations, you can start to collaborate with guests. We have several ways to collaborate with guests. Probably the most popular since when Microsoft Teams is started to be available is across a team. So you can add a member, and you can, as you can see from this image, you can invite easily a guest. The same thing can be performed in SharePoint. So you can share a single file, or you can share the entire site, or a folder in a document library, or just a document library. So the sharing system in SharePoint, it's quite difficult compared to Teams, but we will see this later. But this is another possible way to invite a guest. The third one that I listed here is across OneDrive, so you can easily share your personal files on OneDrive, and you can add a guest there. Okay, all these three actions address to the same result. A new user is added in the Active Directory. If you invite a guest for the first time, this guest will be added in your Active Directory, and you will see the status user invited, and you will have also the possibility to check if the guest has accepted the invitation, and also if he has performed the first login. In this picture, we can see that I invited a guest from another Office 365 tenant, and then I invited a second one, which is a normal Microsoft account, an Outlook account. Okay, let's make the first demo. I have here opened my Office 365 tenant. This is the Active Directory behind the Office 365 tenant. And as you can see, I already invited some guests in a team, but I would like invite a new one in this specific team. So then I will click on Add Members, and I will add my personal email. Okay, now this guest is added to this team. So then we should see this new user added to the Active Directory. This takes sometimes. Here we go. The new guest is invited and added correctly in the Active Directory. This is what happens when you invite a guest for the first time. And then there is also an important functionality in the Active Directory, and this is the audit log, where every activity is recorded. So you can go in and you can see when a guest has been invited. In this case, this email has been invited from this user. Then there are other information like targets, which guest, the email of the guest here. And we have also the ability to explore the additional information in which service this guest has been invited. So you can read also the specific team. Okay, let's go back to the slide now. This was the short demo, just to show you what happened with guests. Let me go back on the agenda. Now let's explore the issues with guests. So in the long term, when you work a lot for several years on your Office 365, and when you collaborate a lot with partners and vendors, as I said, in the long term, it could happen that you have a long list in the Active Directory of guests. So you will have a crowded Active Directory guest list. Then this is the first issue. The second one is that the situation could go out of control, where nobody knows who invited whom when you have thousands, especially when you have thousands of guests. The IT admins has to struggle with the Azure Active Directory audit log, and this is not easy for them. It's a big workload to handle, and then we land to this kind of situation. I think you are familiar with the Battle of Bastards in Game of Thrones. We have our poor IT admins that has to deal with thousands of guests in the Active Directory alone, and has to check periodically which guests have been invited by whom, and then check also if these guests needs access to collaborate with our colleagues or not. So these are not fancy issues to deal with. Okay, let's navigate to the third topics, which is the how to rule guests, how we can implement strong governance. The goal here is to implement a life cycle management process, which allow to give a welcome on board to a guest, maintain the guest, and eventually remove a guest from the Active Directory when the collaboration is no more needed. The key, I think, here is to give responsibility to the colleague or to the employee of our company that has invited the guest. So he will be responsible of his own guests. We have a service already there, ready to go. It's an out-of-the-box solution provided by Microsoft. And you can, in the Active Directory, specify the package for the access review, and then you can assign are responsible in a Office 365 group, for example, to handle guests there. Then we will explore also a custom solution built with Office 365 Management API in combination with Microsoft Graph API. We will see later more detail. Okay, the first solution, the out-of-the-box solution, which came from Microsoft, it requires a Azure Active Directory Premium 2 license, and it costs $9 per user per month. We have here several scenarios. In the first one, for example, the global admin in the Active Directory create this access review package to handle the group A with 65 users and one group owner. If the group owner is responsible of this group, and if he will take care of the guests in this group, we need a license to provide to him. The second scenario is that an administrator creates an access review of the group B with 500 users and 3 group owners, and assign the 3 group owners as reviewers. Third case is that an administrator creates an access review of group B with 500 users and make it a sales review. This is very expensive because we have to provide 500 licenses. Then we have several other scenarios, like, for example, an administrator creates an access review of group C with 50 member users and 25 guest users, make it a self-review. In this case, we have to provide 50 licenses. In the last one, it is more complex, but in any case, for my opinion, this is the benefit of this solution is already good to go, is ready, but the problem is that the IT admins need to work on it periodically, because they need to check if tomorrow, for example, you create a new Office 365 group, or if you create a new team, they need to check the new groups created and create a access review package to rule every new group. So there is a maintenance to perform. So there is a workload for the IT admins to bring forward. And I would say it's not so, it's quite an expensive solution. I don't think this is feasible for all companies. And this is why my intention is to provide also other possibility, like implementing custom solutions. Okay, let's explore now the Microsoft Graph API and how the Microsoft Graph API can help us to build a custom solution and in order to create a lifecycle management process for guests. So in Microsoft 365, we deal day by day with identity, productivity, devices, and security. The layer that connects all these components is the Microsoft Graph API. Microsoft Graph API, it's a unified API endpoint which connects all these components: productivity, identity, security in an organization. To be more detailed, you can imagine the Microsoft Graph API as a circle where you are in there and you can easily stay connected with conversation, files, devices, tasks, mail, events, security, and groups, just to make some examples. But you can stay connected with more components. Then in this slide, I like very much this slide because fulfill the meaning of Microsoft Graph API. So what you can do in the Microsoft 365 platform is you can extend the experiences of documents, conversation, portals, timeline, search, but you can build also your own experience. You can build your custom web application, you can build your bots, you can work with your device, HoloLens, for example. You can create demo apps, which are applications that run with elevated privileges in background and makes done some important process. One of them is the lifecycle management of guests, for example. Behind, you need a background process that check periodically if there are new guests in your tenant, and check also if their collaboration with these guests is still active or not. And then if there's no more collaboration for these guests, remove the guest from the Active Directory. Then you can also build your workflow and your analytics apps. All this layer can interact and can touch the Microsoft Graph API in order to read information on your Microsoft 365 tenant. And you can read information around users, chats, files, devices, mail alerts, events, security, search, and events. But more is possible. I recommend you to open the documentation on Microsoft Graph API, the official Microsoft documentation. There you can find a ton of information. Moving forward, now the Graph API allows us to read the audit log in our Active Directory. So every change is recorded in the Active Directory audit log. So if you invited, like I have done before, if you invite a guest in a team, this information is recorded. You will find in the audit log an entry, add member in a group. You will find all information around this activity, which user has invited which guest, and in which resource, if in Team, in SharePoint, or OneDrive. The data is already available after some minutes. I personally developed this custom solution, and I figured out that after 2-3 minutes, this information is already available in the audit log. If you wonder to build your custom solution in order to check periodically the audit log, not only to create a lifecycle management for guests, but also just to read the audit log and to check every information that you need. For example, if a user is doing the login, or if has done the logout, I'm bringing just some example. What you need to do is to perform a configuration in the Active Directory. In the app registration bleed, you need to define your custom application, and then you need to define the permission directory read all. This will allow your application to read in the Active Directory audit log. If we have time, I'll show you later how you can achieve this goal. Then you can schedule a task. So you can create a pull model, for example, that after X time, this application read in the audit log, and according with the information that there are, this application perform some operations. I would say that this approach is limited to the Office 365 groups. So this kind of approach is very useful because it's very fast. After some minutes, you can react in your lifecycle management process. You can, for example, send notification to the guest that you invited, and you can send also an email to the host, so the person in your company that has invited the guest. So you can produce an welcome on board activity easily and fastly. But the negative aspect is that this is limited to the Office 365 group. So if you invite a guest in SharePoint or in OneDrive, you are not able to find this information in the Active Directory audit log. But I'll show you in a bit in which other audit log you can retrieve this information. The second approach, and it is also the most important if you are wondering to build a custom solution, and it's called the Office 365 Management API. There are two bunch of API there. The first one is the Office 365 Service Communications API that provides service health information to tenant, administrator, and partners. The second one, the most important for my opinion, are the Management Activity API. Provides information about various user, admin system, and policy actions and events from Office 365 and Azure Active Directory activity logs. So you need to create a subscription in order to get notified across webhooks and to consume the APIs. This is another audit log, and this is stored directly in the Office 365 context. I'll show you later where you can read this information. There is a user-friendly page in the admin portal. A global admin can easily access this page by navigating in the security page, security and compliance page, and there is the audit log search. So every activity on Office 365 is recorded there. The negative aspect is that the information is recorded after 45 minutes, more or less. So it is slower than the Microsoft Graph API. That's because I mentioned the Microsoft Graph API, because from my experience, building this kind of custom solution to deal with lifecycle management with guests, I use it both in combination. I use the Graph API in first instance, and like in the second instance, I use the Management API just to check, just to have a second level of checking guests if they are correctly processed from in the first level. Okay, now let's explore much more the Activity API. So there are several content types there. So the first one is the Audit Azure Activity Directory. Provides every information related with the Active Directory, sign in, sign out, user changes. For example, if you change the attribute of a user, if you change the office, or if you change the department, this is recorded in the Active Directory. Group changes as well, member added to a group, as I mentioned it before, member removed from a group. The second content type is the Audit Exchange. Every information exchange related is recorded in this content type. Provides info about accessing, moving or deleting a message, logon type, administrator, delegate, user or owner. Audit log entries also include important information such as the client IP address, host name, and process or client used to access the mailbox. For items that are moved, the entry includes the name of the destination folder. The cool thing here is that you can also check the IP address of the device and from which location the connection is coming. It's pretty cool. So you can combine, for example, process and also limitation in the Active Directory provided, for example, by conditional access. The third content type is the audit SharePoint. Every activity on SharePoint is recorded in this content type. If you create, change, or delete a SharePoint page, for example, or a list or a site collection content type, or if you manage users in SharePoint, every activity is reported in the audit SharePoint content type. Then we have another content type, absolutely important. It's called the audit general, and here you can find all other services on Office 365, not included in the previous content type. So if you invite a guest in Teams, or if you work on Stream, or if you create a workflow in Power Automate, or if you create Power Up, or if you deal with Yammer and OneDrive and all other Office 365 services, these activities are recorded in this content type. So if you make a subscription for this content type, you will get notified for all these services. You can decide to subscribe single subscription for single content type. This means that, for example, you want to build a custom solution that monitor only the SharePoint content type, you can do that. You have just to subscribe. You have just to make a single subscription for the SharePoint content type. But in the case you want to deal with guests, maybe you will need to subscribe to multiple content types. So just to make an example, you need to make a subscription in the Active Directory, then in SharePoint, and then also in the Audit General content type in order to have full control on Office 365. Talking about guests, of course. Then the last content type is the DLPO. This content type provides information about data loss prevention policies. If you are not familiar with this topic, I recommend you to collect more info because it's very cool. You can, as admin, you can create a policy, data loss prevention policy. And for example, you can create a policy that check if a user in your organization put a credit card number in a chat of team, or if store a credit number in some files on SharePoint or OneDrive. The DLP policy trigger in this case and prohibits the user to store and put this information or to share this information with other people. So the DLP policy immediately remove this information from the chat or from the files. Every changes on the DLP policy are recorded in the Office 365 audit log. So you can get notification also around this topic. Let's move now on this other slide. And you can see here that before to make use of the management activity API, you have to enable in the audit log search this functionality. And as you can see from this picture, the global admin has to navigate through the security and compliance center and click on turn on auditing. Once you have done that, after some times, you will see that the audit log will be populated. You have a second option which is provided by using a PowerShell commandlet, you can just enable the audit log auditing with this command. Okay, let's kick off the demo now. How we can consume this management activity API. So I have here now the post client opened, and if you want to start to subscribe to an endpoint of this API, you need to go in the Azure Active Directory. Let me jump in now. I will navigate in the Azure Active Directory, then in the app registration, not in the enterprise application, app registration, Blade. And then here you have to click on the button New Registration, and so you will create a new application here. So then in the API permission, what you need to do, as I mentioned, is to bring in this permission for the Microsoft Graph API, directory read all, if you want to use the Microsoft Graph API as well, in order to check in the audit log if there are guests there. And then the second one is the Office 365 management APIs. So you need to bring in this kind of permission, activity feed read and activity feed read DLP and service out read as well. But this is the most important if you need to check all the activity performed from guests in your tenant. How you can do that? You have to click on Add Permission, and you will find this Office 365 Management APIs in this page. You have to click here. Then I think you, and I hope you will add the application permission, because you need to create a daemon application that can have full permission to read the audit log. And then you have to select the permission that you need to validate. After that, you have to grant as admin this permission that you will added, because you will see an exclamation point as icon here, and in order to modify this icon and to grant this permission, you have to click on the grant admin consent. Once you have done that, you can use this application to consume the management API and to consume the Graph API if you added this as well. Another important thing to check is the application ID. So you need the application client ID. I'll show you in a bit. And then you need also the tenant ID. Let me jump now on the certificates and secrets blade. You have to create a client secret here. This, when you create a new one, this will be in plain text only the first time. Once you close the pop-up, this will be it will be not possible to read again. So you have to copy immediately this secret and store in some secure place, an Azure Key Vault, for example. So then, once you have done that, you are ready to go to work with the Microsoft Graph API and the Office 365 Management Activity API. Now, going back on Postman client application, I have prepared here some requests. The first one that you need to do is, if you are not familiar with the authentication with Microsoft Graph API, I'll tell you now how this process works, but it works in the same way also for the management API. Before to consume the Graph API, you have to get a valid token, and then you have to use this access token to perform every new other Graph API or management API request. So you need to create, in order to do that, a post request, and then you have to add this URL, loginmicrosoftonline.com, and then you have to use your tenant ID there. I created variables because it's more practical. Finally, /authentication2 and token. And then in the body, you have to select a form URL encoded option for the body. And then you have to add client ID key. Then you have to add your client ID. I have a variable here. Then the resource, you have to specify here if you want to consume the management API or the graph API. I'll show you how differ this for the graph API. I have Microsoft Graph API here because, for example, I need to consume the graph API. But when I need to check the audit log of the Office 365, I need to retrieve a token with the resource manageoffice.com. Then you have to specify the grant type, client credentials here, and finally the client secret. And this is also a variable. A best practice is to apply an expiration date for the client secret, 1 year, for example, and then you need to renew this secret when expire if you want to get a valid access token. Okay, once you are ready to go, you can perform this request how I have done previously. Then you will get this response. The most important is the access token. You have a bunch of other information when this token expire, because the life of a token is limited. Every time you have to check is the token if still valid or not, and if not, you need to get a new one. So when we collect this access token, we have to use this access token in every other new request that we are intended to perform to the Office 365 Management API. The same for the Graph API. Let's say that now in this request, I want to collect my active subscription with the Management Activity API. As you can see here, previously I already sent this request by specifying the tenant ID, and I have 3 subscriptions in place for the content type Audit Azure Active Directory for this address, for this URL. I'll show you in a bit what is this URL. It's a logic app. So this logic app will get webhooks from the Management API when a new content is recorded in the Office 365 audit log for this content type. The second one is the audit general content type. Let's say that when we add a new guest in a team, we will get notified in this URL that a new guest has been added in the team A from the user blah blah. And then we can trigger our process and do something with this guest. We can give him a welcome on board. We can provide an email with some terms of use, how he or she can work on our tenant. And then we have this last one, subscription active, which is the audit SharePoint, because I want to monitor if my colleagues invite guests on SharePoint or OneDrive, for example. Okay, then another important request that I would like to show you is how you can subscribe to the Office 365 Management API. So this is the URL that you need to use, manage.office.com API version 1, which is the stable one. Then you have to use your tenant ID here, activity feed subscription start. This will start a new subscription. Then in query string, you have to provide the content type, audit Azure Active Directory, for example. And then the most important one is the publisher identifier. So this should be your tenant ID. This is very important because with this kind of ID will say that this subscription will be created exclusively only for your organization. If you omit this, as I made the first time, you share this subscription with other people, and it's very easy to get throttled when you consume the API. It's very easy because there are a lot of people that maybe works with this subscription because they are just exploring the potential of this API, or they need just to make some test. So then if you need to create a subscription in your tenant, you need always to provide in query string the publisher identifier, and it should be your tenant ID. Okay, say that. Let's see now in the body what we have. In the body, you have to provide this parameter, webhook, and then inside you have to provide the address. So which address will get notification? This could be a logic app, this could be an Azure function, and then the authentication ID. This will help you to figure out if you made or not this subscription. And then the expiration. If you don't provide any information around the expiration, this will be unlimited. Okay, once you have done that, you will start to collect notification from the management API. And I'll show you now my email because I configured my logic apps that collect information to send me every new notification. So after a while, I get notification for this content type, audit general, and maybe this content type tell me that I have to check this URL to read this content type, to read this audit log, if a new guest has been added or removed. And the same thing for other content type. We have the Azure Active Directory here, and audit general as well. Last thing that I would like to show you is the page that I previously mentioned in the audit page in the admin portal under the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. This is the Office 365 audit log, and you can search any kind of information. We have one, for example, here. This user, me, has invited a guest in this team, collaboration application Lisbon. If I open this one, I can explode more information, and I can see that for this team, we have here the team, the resource. If this is a SharePoint site, I will have the proper information here as well. And I can see also that the member that has been added, I can immediately figure out that this is a guest, because you can see this alias in the Active Directory, this UPN. So this is a guest. In fact, this is one of my private email. The member has been added in Microsoft Teams, as I said, and has been invited from this user. So then you can trigger this, you can elaborate and work with this information in your custom solution, and then you can build your lifecycle management for guests easily in this way. Okay, let's close this session now. I will be there to answer at any of your questions. You can find this slide additional information around the Microsoft Graph API, how to get started, as well for the Office 365 management APIs. And again, here how you can stay in touch with me. Here my YouTube channel, my blog, my Twitter handle, my Facebook page, my GitHub account, and finally my LinkedIn page. I hope you enjoyed the session. As I said, I will spare additional 10 minutes to answer to your question. Thank you for joining me. Here the QR code to provide feedback to me and also to the event. Please, I have family and 2 kids, so be nice.